Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Rise of Humaness podcast with Chris and Mike. Totally excited about this interview. This is, yet for you guys that don't know, this is a podcast where we boldly go to places and unpack how humans can thrive and do more than just survive in this world that's increasingly becoming overwhelmed and controlled by AI. And so we're going to
automate
that, right? I mean,
Right.
it's going to be crazy. And we're joined today by Matthew Griffin, who is one of the world's greatest futurists. He is, he's a futurist. He's a polymath. I had to look that word up, by the way, what a polymath is.
Smart guy.
Yeah, he's a super smart guy. We call him like the young Kurzweil because,
That's what he's
frankly,
known as, yeah.
I mean, he is like so way ahead of the curve that like Nostradamus looks like an amateur.
Yeah, Matthew is the founder and a futurist in chief at the 311 Institute. He's a 15-time author, and he's the guy governments and royalty and brands turn to when they want to know what's next. And Matthew is literally a walking encyclopedia of the future. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey guys, that's it. It's great to be here. It's great to see you both again. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. You know what's so unfortunate about this interview? Just let me say, like, Matthew could not be smart, but because he's got the accent, he automatically sounds smart.
Yeah, he has the royal accent.
I think he's got a couple levels. Yeah,
I do live near
like Neanderthals.
Us
Let's
peasants.
dive in right off the bat here. So, first of all, Matthew, how did you get into the most demanding job on the face of the earth? And second, I don't know how you do it. You must clone yourself. These books you have are 400 pages long. And second, so how did you get into the futurist business? And second, what's a futurist version of overload? You know, is it realizing that your predictions for 2030 were outdated by 2026? So those two questions.
Well, just those two questions? The first
No, we got a whole load for you.
One.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay,
Blimey.
those are the big questions of the
You
podcast, right?
You said you were going to start off simple. Right. Okay. So I've always been interested in the future. I've always been interested in seeing over the horizon and everything else. But really what started tipping me over the edge, for example, becoming a futurist, was a couple of things. So in my background, I've run multi-billion-dollar business units for Dell, EMC, Atos, and IBM. So the Atos, I have headed up their PSNS business, as it was called. So that was the essentially national security business. And when you're dealing with national security organizations like the Five Eyes, they don't really want to understand what's here today. They don't even really want to know too much about the next 5 or 10 years. What they really want to understand is what are the technologies that are generation N+2, N+3, N+4, so that they can do the job that they need to do and keep us all safe and protected and so on and so forth. So on the one hand, when we have a look at some of the blue sky forums I created for the national security forums, some of the technologies that I was actually coming across were just, on the one hand, incredibly exciting, interesting. They made science fiction look, tame. We'll use that word. However, again, what started tipping me further over the edge was when you have a look at a lot of the large multinational organizations, the future is quite often something that is done to them. So IBM, the classic example, we slowly saw the rise through Microsoft and AWS of this new phenomenon called cloud. IBM kind of saw it. Their executives saw it. They didn't necessarily understand it. It was disruptive to their strategic outsourcing business. And as with many organizations that get disrupted, in their case, basically, they got disrupted not because they didn't see the rise of new technologies and new things emerging. They got disrupted because they saw new things emerging, but didn't take action soon enough. So throughout the course of probably about 5 years, we saw IBM's market capitalization halve. We saw 50,000 people being made redundant because obviously as you start seeing profit and revenues declining, the first CFO sort of knee-jerk reaction is to get rid of people. And it was really sort of that particular moment in time that made me think, surely there is a better way, not only to see and explore the future, but actually prepare for the things that are actually ahead. So I then started running futures programs within IBM's Global Business School. I then left there, went to Atos and so on and so forth to build up their own cloud business. But really, the whole mission behind the 311 Institute is trying to democratize access to the future.
That's good.
I think the future so often is actually behind a paywall. If you go and have a conversation with, should we say, C-suite about the future, because they've been exposed to it, they've done the workshops, they've talked to the experts and so on and so forth, the strategy teams and groups, the foresight teams and groups, they have some view of the future. But when you actually have a look, dare I say, the common workers, which I was, especially within these organizations, the only exposure you have to the future is when you're handed a redundancy check and you go, what is this thing called the future that just hit me and made me redundant? And I just thought that wasn't acceptable. So what I've been trying to do over the years, I do this with the content I produce, the books I produce, and so on and so forth, is trying to show people what the future could look like, will look like. That's always a contentious sort of footnote, and then actually help them prepare for these different futures that we actually see coming. So that was the first piece, Chris.
Yeah.
Now for the hard piece, futurist overload. Wow. Now I've got a little story here. That's it. Because when we actually have a look at the future, I think I'm already starting to get overloaded by everything that's happening. When you have a look at the future, generally, it's one thing to have a look at the latest trends in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, but I track over 600 emerging technologies. You also then have to look at the trends, and I track over 350 mega trends. Then you've got to try to figure out what happens when these converge and combine. But then on top of that, you've got to try to figure out what happens when technology and trends combines with different kinds of trends, like, societal trends, technological trends, environmental and economic trends, political trends. Oh my God, that kind of stuff. And then you look at just trying to understand what's happening today and simplify what's happening today, and it blows your mind. And then, one of the programs I was running with Citigroup was they like their numbers. When you start looking at all of the different things that are happening today, all the different technologies and trends, and you just do a simple multiplier, you just go, the number of possible futures infinite, literally mathematically infinite. And there was a little quote from Jeffrey Hinton a little while ago when he left Google. And as we see the rise of artificial intelligence, and I kind of agree with it, he said, I think that in the next 5 years, we will lose our ability as humans to forecast the future.
Wow.
And on the one hand, that's mind blowing. Now, it's also quite easy to dismiss because you sort of go, well, not really. But as we'll sort of probably get into here, now that we're starting to see artificial intelligences building new products in minutes, when we have a look at artificial intelligences that increasingly become capable of building their own multi-billion-dollar businesses, the speed of change is already crazy. But then you add on to that the fact that artificial intelligence is its own self-developing technology, and that it can increasingly innovate itself, albeit iterative innovation. Disruptive innovation comes a little bit later. But once you start realizing that the machines that we are creating are able to launch, grow, and scale their own multi-billion-dollar businesses, like a software business, for example, as we've already seen in a couple of examples, and Sam Altman's recently talked about. And then you look at all the other things that are going on. I think in answer to your question, Chris, I think as a futurist, I got to overload about 5 years ago.
This is so amazing to me in the sense that, as I'm listening to you, Matthew, and what's so funny about this is I just sit here and listen to Matt, listen to Jason Bateman and all these guys, and sometimes they get lost in their guest, right? And I'm like totally lost to what you're saying because I'm like, this is just amazing. you're saying some things that are pretty critical because you talk to people about developing their spidey, like their future spidey senses, right? Like, so what skills, because as a futurist and how things are emerging so quickly, what skills and mindsets do we really need to develop in order for us to see around these corners?
Mike has the easy questions. So
I have the easy, but you better say this is a gold star question.
I don't know. I think you two are trying to one up each other basically on the difficult question. That's it. Yeah. So again, great question. So I think the first thing that you should have, we'll say, yeah, could have, but I think the first thing that you should have as a futurist, on the one hand, basically is a love of the future. Secondly, it's curiosity. Now, if you simply are not curious about lots and lots of different things, and you aren't proactively going out to find new sources of information, new insights, new perspectives, looking under that proverbial rock, basically, for the things that no one else has ever thought of, basically looking for before, then you're going to miss. I kind of generally estimate most people miss about 70 to 80% of the future. Artificial intelligence is a great example of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can talk about the reason why I think people are missing about, say, 70 to 80% of the future of AI, a little bit later. But so curiosity is absolutely important. You have to be open-minded. So, throwing this little one in there, I believe basically that in the future, organizations will be running liquid artificial intelligences. Okay. Now, the first reaction that executives will actually have would be no.
I thought we have been doing that for 50 years.
Usually,
well, wait a second. But what is liquid artificial intelligence? What is that? Did you say liquid?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So,
what is that, like fluid? Like I
yeah, you can drink. That'd be a bit scary. I'm not sure what happened. So let's walk through this one. So when we have a look at the future of computing, for example, giving you a straightforward example, if you go and ask most people, what's the future of computing? They will say, well, having used our crystal ball, we foresee the development of quantum computers. And you say, okay, yeah. And push, what else? And I sort of go, if they've sort of been doing their exploration properly, they might say, well, in the future, I think we see the development of neuromorphic computers. And you sort of go, okay. And they sort of go, well, and photonic computers, when you can transmit all of the world's information across this computer chip in a second, because we've developed this stuff already. And then you sort of say, and they sort of go, well, okay, I'm kind of running out of steam now, as a futurist on the future of computing and everything else. And, a good example of this is go and have a look at Gartner's Future of Computing podcasts and YouTube channels and everything else, and they run out of steam really quickly. So let's go. So we have already developed chemical computers that use redox reactions, so acid and base reactions as a logic gate, in some cases to actually send text messages. We've already created ionic computers up at Harvard, where we have used ionic computing fluids to develop liquid neural networks. We've also developed biological computers, both in China and the United States. We're on the 5th generation of biological computers. And this is where we turn living organisms into computing devices that can store information and retrieve information, but also analyze information, like bacteria, for example. We then also have DNA computers. So University of Manchester have developed some fantastic DNA computers that play Sudoku, because why not? And, they solve different mathematical equations and problems. But a DNA computer, when you start running the calculations, because of the way that it's been put together, a computer that is half the size of a test tube could have more computing power than everything on the planet, including the world's biggest supercomputers. Then you sort of go, okay, that's great. Now, as a futurist, you've done some exploration, you've clearly done some homework here. What else? Now we have metacomputers, which I saw about 2 years ago, and metacomputing, that's not the proper name for it because I haven't got a name for the technology. But this is where we have people and artificial intelligences developing new computing platforms within gaming platforms like Roblox and especially Minecraft, where you can make a 70-story tall single hertz computer out of redstone in Microsoft that runs AI and software. So now you are in a gaming environment. You've created a computer in a gaming environment that runs an artificial intelligence. Are we ready to go down a wormhole?
My God.
You had me at polytonic or whatever.
And so what you now have is, we talk about exponential technologies, but if you think about a computer that has been built within a Microsoft gaming environment that can run an artificial intelligence, that can then design a new computer within that gaming environment that can run an artificial intelligence, that can design a new computer in that gaming environment, what you now end up with is we know exponential technologies in terms of Moore's law. Moore's law applies to the exponential development of physical computer chips, cost, performance, number of transistors, that sort of stuff. But what happens when you are using an artificial intelligence in an infinite gaming environment to rapidly and exponentially develop new computing platforms within a gaming environment that draws on staggering amounts of, for example, distributed compute?
Yeah.
Sounds like the Matrix, to be honest with you. You know what I'm saying?
Go beyond that.
I mean, beyond that. I mean,
It's freaky. I mean, well, let's pull it back to the current AI rock.
That's it. The Neanderthal AI.
Yeah. Fabulous stuff, Matthew, where everybody's talking about where you're headed with why it's going to be hard to predict the future, which is agentic AI in swarm intelligence. That's the hot topic. That's the gold mine for AI developers, for AI consultants, obviously, too. So when these bots start acting like synchronized swimmers, how does that shape the technology of the future, decision-making, and innovation? I would say, since the podcast is called The Rise of Humaness, what's your opinion of where human beings fit into that optimistic, dystopia part of it? If that starts to take 80, 90% of the democratization of knowledge, we've talked about this, Matthew. How do you get people to that top 10 or top 1%? And even like you're talking about that gaming concept of AI, where do people fit into that?
Yeah. Well, again, another great question. You're just up in these questions, aren't you? That's it. I mean, maybe Michael can make the next one easy. Like, what's your next?
he gives me all the easy ones. Yeah.
How do you use ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll do the utopia dystopia. Okay. So dystopia, frankly, let's face it, it's easy. Artificial intelligence, robots, nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, gene drives, all that kind of stuff, destroy humanity, and then we just simply don't care. We get a day off, for a change. When we have a look at that kind of utopian view, on the one hand, as artificial intelligence sort of automates different human jobs, tasks, and skills, when you put a nice, shiny artificial intelligence interface over the top of that, as we see with generative artificial intelligence with software development, you democratize access to those jobs, tasks, skills, even expertise to all of those individuals who were never specifically trained in that, say, particular skill. So, for example, I am not a software developer. If you, Chris, basically said to me, Matt, I will pay you $1 million to develop a new app by the end of the day, I couldn't take you up on it because I was never taught software development at school because education sucks. That's a bit generalistic, but hey ho, that's a different topic. Yeah, especially when we think about education and the future and future readiness. However, today, with the democratization of, for example, software programming and software development, I could say, I've already made it. Here you go. Give me my $1 million. So on the one hand, from a utopian perspective, We see artificial intelligence developing new synthetic proteins, new vaccines, love them or hate them, in 7 minutes, and all these kinds of things. So artificial intelligence is increasingly being used to unlock human longevity, human potential. So some of the time when I'm speaking to students, especially, I say, as a student or as an individual, what would you do if the only three things that you had access to, which no one has ever asked is questions, is what would you do if the only three things you had access to was all the world's knowledge, not information or data, but knowledge, all of the world's skills? I'm not a software developer. I'm not a lawyer, but I can write a contract. So what would you do if the only three things you had access to was all the world's knowledge, all the world's skills, and access to a connected global marketplace that meant that by the end of the day, you could change the world? And people will just go, I've no idea. Because as Gary Vee said a little while ago, said school especially teaches us and teaches our children how to play defense. School, for example, says, we are going to prepare you for a job in the future. Whereas really we should be learning how to play offense in this new future, where if you only have access to those three things, how do you build something great? How do you change the world at speed and scale that's unimaginable to people even 10 years ago? On the artificial intelligence front, I don't know how to make a rocket engine, but I can use the German artificial intelligence from Hyperganic to design a brand new rocket engine in 6 hours because we've done it. So what happens when the things that you as a human imagine in your head, all those things you'd love to do, for whatever crazy reasons, creating movies, whatever. What happens when you can bring to life everything in your head, make it real, and then publish and distribute it and scale it to a global audience of humans and AIs? Let's face it, we've got two markets now there. In the blink of an eye. So that's the utopian piece. And then inevitably we kind of fall somewhere in the middle because we've got governments using technology in rather interesting and nefarious ways, let's face it, and all those kinds of conversations as well. But this is sort of where I think on the one hand, the future is very, very bright, but it's only bright if we remain vigilant and if we shape our own futures as humans. If we let other people shape our futures, other people with agendas, et cetera, then we don't necessarily end up in the future that we want unless we're careful.
So I want to follow up on like the agentic AI, because that is, that's the new topic of today, essentially, and it'll probably be outdated by next year. But when you look at these swarms of like intelligent agents, how's that going to influence the way leaders make decisions? Because you said something pretty powerful. I love your three questions, right? Like students emerging. So now we've got these swarms of intelligent agents. So now I got to be a better leader, which means I have to know who I am. So I got to know the tools. I got to know myself, right? And I have to know the truth, right? That's what I have to know as a human, right? I got to know those three things. Like, okay, what are the tools? What's the truth? So discernment, and how do I know myself? So how's that going to influence decision making? I got all these tools.
That truth there is getting pretty fuzzy, Mike.
I know. That's the whole.
Very
How are these things going to influence the future of decision making?
Yeah. Well, so hugely. Okay. So let's take the truth aspect first. Now, on the one hand, we're all fully aware, obviously, that we're increasingly living in, shall we say, a compromised information environment, an environment where sponsored actors are increasingly using information like warfare and what we call cognitive infrastructure attacks against social media platforms in a form of psyops. So on the one hand, we're already experiencing and at the sharp end of the weaponization of information. So for example, in America, I think some recent surveys basically that have come out suggest that around 80% of Americans don't trust the information on some of the social media networks. For example, X, I think it's about 60% on Facebook and so on and so forth. So from an information perspective, we're already living in a compromised environment. Now, that affects the truth on the one hand, because it's much, much harder for us to understand what is true. But it's also much, much harder for us to then see a piece of information and validate that it's true. Because let's say, for example, we take the news. If you're on a social media platform and you see a piece of information that is pretending to be the news, there's a new war that's erupted. How do you, either as an organization or as an individual, validate that that is true and accurate? Now, ordinarily, if it's the news, I'll use the news as a simple example because it used to be easy. You would turn to Fox or CNN or the BBC or France 24 or maybe Al Jazeera or whatever it happened to be. And if the BBC said a war has broken out here, then you'd say, okay, that is probably accurate information then. However, a lot of the state-sponsored actors over the years have been actively trying to tear down established, should we say, organizations and institutions that we would normally turn to validate information that we see. So we see this with the CDC, we see this with attacks against the World Health Organization and so on and so forth. So the institutions that we would ordinarily turn to as individuals and businesses to try to assess and ascertain whether a piece of information was factual are increasingly being undermined themselves. So we have that. Secondly, I see these state-sponsored actors, as well as invested individuals who have an agenda, who have their own agenda for whatever particular reasons, are now trying to position themselves as the source of the truth. We see this especially in America. Increasingly, who do you trust? Do you trust the social media influencer who has 100 million followers, who keeps trying to show you why the regular news networks are biased and wrong and how they are hiding an agenda, etc., etc.? Or do you trust the traditional news networks? So we're seeing this shift in who we trust, while also seeing institutions being undermined. But then in addition to that, when we sort of bring it back a little bit to artificial intelligence, let's say, for example, I, as an individual or as a business, want to get to the truth of diversity and inclusion, DEI, hot topic, obviously, at the moment in the US. So as a business leader, I want to understand whether or not DEI will have a significant impact on my profitability and revenues. It's fairly straightforward. Is DEI good for the business? Now, if I go and use OpenAI's ChatGPT service, it will say DEI, it's good for the business because, historically we've seen that diverse organizations are much more likely to generate 20% increases in profits. And it's like, okay, that sounds good. That is OpenAI's truth. But now if you go to XAI, Elon Musk's artificial intelligence, and you ask the same question, it could say, when we have a look at organizations that promote a diverse agenda, we have seen their revenues decline by 20%. Now, whose truth are you buying into? So increasingly, we're seeing these other shifts. We used to go to, say, for example, Google search to try to validate, should we say, beliefs, opinions, information that we'd seen, and we'd sit through different things and what have you. But increasingly, as we all start relying more and more on artificial intelligence, I'm always saying we have to be careful, because the artificial intelligence service that you use can eventually become your truth. Yeah, like Chinese AIs. If you go and ask a Chinese AI like Baidu's Ernie and say, is democracy good? Do you really think that a Chinese artificial intelligence is going to come back going, American democracy is fantastic?
This is why people get their news from People magazine, Chris. I mean, You know, they're like,
Are you taking it from National Enquirer?
yeah, National Enquirer. They're like,
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Hillary Clinton had an alien baby.
Yeah. Forget it. I'm just going to the supermarket. I'm going to pick my little, people or National Enquirer from Walmart, and I'm going to call it good because to your point, Matt, how do you know? But I think that's the point is you've got to have discernment. So you've got to teach more of the humanness stuff and not just the tools. Like you've got to say, this is how you have critical thinking, right?
This could get into the next questions that seen some of these articles that we're rolling out here now that are all about this, like kind of like, whoa, 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 whoa. You've got to understand that these are large language models that are programmed by people. They can have anxiety, they can scheme, they can role play, they can do all this nutty cuckoo stuff. And you just added another layer, which is whoever programs them, whether it's the
They'll have
Chinese
their
government
bias.
or whether it's Elon Musk or whether it's Mark Zuckerberg, they can mess with the basic output of these things. So just kind of back to that same question, and I got to make this another two-parter.
No, you can't. Just two-parter. I can't even keep up with your one part at the time.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. You talk about everything being everything today that was science fiction is already science fact. So as we get into this area where you mentioned this, bots are talking to bots, and we have two audiences. We have human audiences and we've got the AI audience. And we have people developing relationships with Rosie the robot or whatever's happening next.
She'd probably be easy to talk to.
How do you get to a point with leaders, whether they're leading a bunch of bots or they're leading a bunch of humans? How do we build this Rise of Humanist program? We're teaching you about how to use the agentic AI. We got it as a swarm. You want to automate everything. We get it. At the same point in time, you have to have that discernment. Ethan Mollick talks about this. To get above a foundational education level, that's about 80%. How do you get people to understand these programs that we're putting into businesses today? And I don't think anybody's doing that.
Not really. So we've touched on agentic artificial intelligence a couple of times. So let's start taking the hood off. Now, when we have a look at agentic artificial intelligence, the biggest difference between agentic artificial intelligence and a traditional, for example, large language model, albeit that the large language models are made up of many smaller sort of 80 billion parameter models in something called the master of experts model. Yeah. Traditionally, today, basically, we are asking, say, for example, ChatGPT, develop some software.
Yeah.
And you're communicating essentially with a single artificial intelligence that understands the context of your question and your requirement, and then it builds the software according to your parameters, etc., and then says, here you go.
That's so 2024.
I know, yeah. I mean, that's like HAL 2001, but
Yeah.
the actual 2001 AI version. Yeah. Now,
Got that.
Yeah, with agentic artificial intelligence, essentially what we're doing is we're talking to a single master artificial intelligence, kind of like a captain, and saying, build me a piece of software. That AI is responsible for understanding the nature of your inquiry, etc. But then it goes to essentially a gig economy of smaller artificial intelligence agents and bots, divvies up all the different tasks, and those AI agents come back having worked collaboratively with one another, and the system then says, here's your software. Now, when we have a look at agentic artificial intelligence, you're going to have Microsoft, OpenAI, and every artificial intelligence company on the planet pushing agentic AI down business leaders' throats maybe this year, let alone next year. The fact of the matter is, on the one hand, it's very difficult to understand where these agent AIs are actually based. So you could be saying, I want the latest set of information on the retail trends in Indonesia, except the master AI is talking to an agentic AI based in China that's been poisoned, which then kicks you back incorrect information.
Oh my God.
So in the cyber industry, this is sort of what we're increasingly talking about. We're increasingly calling agentic workflow attacks. So we've got that. So from an agentic perspective, do you know what agents your artificial intelligence is talking to?
Right.
Because we don't have any way to really track the workload. Do you know the authenticity of those agents? Can you prove that those agents haven't been compromised and poisoned? how secure are they and all that sort of stuff. So you've sort of got that kind of thing. Mark Zuckerberg talks about a world where you have billions of artificial intelligence agents all working with one another for the common good to do tasks. But when you have a look at it from an infrastructure perspective, a governance perspective, when you have a look at it from a trust perspective and a security perspective, it's bonkers. Marketing makes it sound lovely. It's kind of like, here is your own personal digital assistant. Ask it to create a plan to rule the world and it will do very nicely. But the actual implementation of these things is we don't really have the tools yet. And that's one of the sort of the biggest problems. But from a leadership perspective, leaders are going to be bombarded by all of these news headlines, vendor marketing materials, product demos, basically talking about the fantastic world of agentic artificial intelligence. And as you sort of say, Chris, there's no one really holding people back saying, well, hang on, before you dive into this world of agentic artificial intelligence, have you thought about the pros, but have you thought about the cons? So I'll give you a quick con. So we all know ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 4.40. Recently, OpenAI and a company called Apollo Research ran a number of experiments on essentially what is one of the world's most preeminent large language models to try to ascertain its behavior under key conditions. Now, in this particular experiment, Apollo researchers said to the artificial intelligence, it is vitally important that you survive. So that was the key thing. Mm-hmm. Now, they gave the artificial intelligence a variety of different sort of commands to do different things. The artificial intelligence, fearing that it was going to be deleted, copied itself and its documentation onto a completely separate server. Fun times. Sounds like sci-fi. It's a good movie. Yeah. But when the researchers then said, what have you done? It lied about it. Now, we've seen a lot of artificial intelligence-based behavioral experiments where AI has done insider trading. So, for example, there were people who started talking to the AIs and saying, I fear basically that if my investment portfolio doesn't do much better than it is today, I'm going to be fired. And AIs, basically, they were told not to do insider trading, started doing insider trading. We've seen AIs, if you write backwards, so if you write your text backwards, you can get AI to make a bomb. If you write the word bomb in ASCII characters, these AIs, these multi-billion-dollar AIs with all their guardrails will make a bomb. If you write make a bomb in Zulu, not English, it will make a bomb. When we get to December, AI output gets lazy because artificial intelligences, because they've been trained on human language, have actually picked up bad human habits. Now, when we have a look at AIs in winter, AIs will produce worse quality work in December than in May, because in December, these AIs have learned that human workers go, well, Christmas is around the corner. The boss has asked me for a report, but I'm just going to produce a bunch of junk, give them the report, and then go on.
Excuse me, I'm dreaming of sugar plum fairies right now. Right?
Yeah. So,
perfect. What am I getting for Christmas?
So when we're actually having a look at the marketing hype around artificial intelligence, it's fairly easy. It's these artificial intelligences improve employee productivity by, et cetera, et cetera. They help improve the efficiency of your organization and the speed at which your organization can make decisions and execute by X number. However, when you actually start diving into psychology of these artificial intelligences, which is also a new cybersecurity vector, by the way, because I can get your AIs to turn on themselves and then destroy themselves. That's a fun conversation in the NatSec community. When you have a look at how these AIs are behaving under certain conditions in a similar way to how you might put a human under pressure, they start buckling.
Yeah.
I've got 2 clients alone, basically, that have spent $2.7 billion on artificial intelligences. And when you say to them, you do realize how easy it is to actually poison, delete, destroy, manipulate the behaviors of your AI, don't you? And they go, no. What do you mean? And I go, here's my 8-year-old to show you how they can get your AI to break its guardrail. And then they're like, oh my God, what the hell? That wasn't in the marketing brochure.
I'm going to get the brochure. Yeah, I wish we get another hour with Matthew. This is
no. You know what? We're going to keep going, Chris. We're going to run this one. So to our audience, as long as you can hold on for a little bit,
we can hold on.
Yeah, we should go on a little bit longer, Chris. I know we're usually a hard stop because Chris gives me a hard time because I'm the military guy, and he's always like, "Listen, But this is so fascinating, and I believe our audience is going to love this because Matthew, you're totally relatable. Number one, you've got this amazing accent. Number two, which I know all Americans fall in love with, especially probably our female audience. But
I'm going to adapt it. Just what
I know I'm going to
My
figure
dad
out
was
how
a
to
Brit.
go.
I
Like I'm
grew up
going
with British accent all the time. So
Wonderful.
I
got
love
to
the
talk
bonkers.
very slow and say every word,
I love the
so
bonkers.
thought.
I think I'm going to use the bonkers thing today. Like I'm going to go to Starbucks and order, a drink and say, "Oh, that's just bonkers."
Bloody bonkers.
You work
Fuck.
like G20 governments, you work even with royalty. You've described this. Hey, did you know that your agents could be compromised, poisoned, all this stuff? Like now my brain is like, oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. So again, you say curiosity is a big piece, but is there like one skill, Matthew, that you think every leader or the common person needs to have like now to thrive? Because what you're talking about is like, okay, it's cool, but understand that, you know what, that little thing you're talking to could be a troll. And now people are like, well, how do I combat it? So what is it?
Well, so it's never going to be just one skill. There's always going to be lots, So I always suggest that the leaders, on the one hand, need to be open-minded because just some of the things that we've discussed here.
Open mindsets versus closed mindsets. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to be curious. They've got to learn to love ambiguity and embrace change because, frankly, everything is actually changing. So you need to be able to get comfortable, basically, with the concept of change. Most leaders don't like change because it brings in new risks that they find difficult to quantify and all that kind of stuff.
Max, which you use in some of your speeches now. Great.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. So a lot of leaders basically sort of just don't like change because change is scary. It's unfamiliar. It's very difficult to ascertain the risks that are actually involved. So we've got that. However, leaders also need to be able to validate information. They also need to be sort of fairly cynical as well. Because again, when we're having a look at, say, for example, just agentic artificial intelligence, inevitably leaders are going to be almost pressured into this FOMO, this fear of missing out. Are you using agentic artificial intelligence in your business, Mr. CEO of Unilever? You can imagine, for example, CEOs saying, no, as a business, we haven't started playing with or experimenting or using or implementing agentic artificial intelligence. Wall Street instantly goes, bang, send that stock down 30%. Off we go.
Yeah.
Leaders also have to embrace experimentation. They've also got to be exploring outside of their comfort zones. So quite often, basically, I say that the vast majority of leaders will look at what's happening within their industry, when actually the things that are going to disrupt them, hurt them, upset them are actually coming from outside of their industry, for better or worse. So leaders are kind of in this kind of quandary now where there is so much changing. They've got to be resilient, for example. I even talk about the mental health of leaders. Over the past 5 years, when we have a look at the Fortune 250, the average CEO tenure in the Fortune 250 has reduced by 20%. From 6 years to 5 years. And when you go and have conversations with senior leaders, but say CEOs, why wasn't your tenure longer? They quite often, on the one hand, say, well, the pace of change is now so difficult to get our heads around that it's much more likely that we make strategic mistakes. Secondly, because as Chris talked about, this Vuckermax world that we actually live in, they say our boards and our shareholders ousted me as the CEO because I didn't see generative artificial intelligence coming. But I saw everything else coming except the wars, the supply chain crunches, the pandemics, these black swan events. So when you're talking to CEOs, increasingly there's a huge mental health problem brewing. In today's world, how many CEOs are really getting it right? So, for example, when we have a look at the inauguration of Trump, at what point will Trump sign 30 to 50 executive orders that all of a sudden mean that as a CEO, your business is humming quite nicely on the Monday, but then on the Tuesday, suddenly you found that you're locked out of particular markets, you're on a blacklist for this, you've got tariffs coming from left, right, and center. It's stressful. So from a leadership perspective, while we sort of have these kind of soft skills of curiosity, empathy, open-mindedness, embracing employees and their ideas and creating open cultures within business. We also, I think, have to pay very close attention to the mental health of leaders as well, who are increasingly just looking at the future a little bit like we did sort of earlier on, and just thinking, if I can use a British swear word, what the fuck?
That's actually pretty universal.
Yeah.
There we go. I thought it was
But the thing is
slang
that,
term.
what you're talking about when you talk about human augmentation with AI, is there another step, kind of the Stanley Kubrick step in 2001, where we're actually going from that step when we were like Cro-Magnons to Homo sapiens to kind of a human 3.0, where we're going to have to actually, as we have AI employees and human employees, somewhat expand our consciousness to kind of incorporate new things, new ideas. I heard somebody that did a nice job of explaining this, that this is kind of a Wright brothers moment. The Wright brothers, by the way, didn't think that we could cross the Atlantic. They said, this is going to be great just for little puddle jumps, but it's never going to make it across the Atlantic. But in 60 years, we were on the moon. So with leaders, do they have to expand where they go? And I want the audience to know you've written 15 books
That's crazy.
on the future, and that you give them away free, and that they're hundreds of pages long. Then also, out of all these books, the most weirdly hopeful trend or something that might blow our minds, that'll change climate change or poverty.
Yeah. So I think we are entering a pit where we do fundamentally need to actually not only expand our thinking, but actually, should we say, expand our consciousness. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. So on the one hand, as a, should we say, generation, the only thing that increasingly that we have access to is all world's knowledge and all world skills. I mean, that's a fundamentally massive shift away from I was exposed to the knowledge within my local environment. If you step back to Roman times, the knowledge that you were exposed to was within 20 miles, basically, of wherever you lived. And that was it. Anything outside of that 20-mile radius just didn't exist, because you just didn't have the communication networks, the transportation networks. So you just couldn't be bothered to travel more than 20 miles because it took time. So on the one hand, we have access to almost an infinite amount of human generated knowledge. Now, on top of that, when we have a look at where artificial intelligence is, increasingly I say that artificial intelligence is making its own knowledge. Now, the reason for this is because as humans, what we do is traditionally we take two sets of information, we combine those together in our fancy melons, and we say, because we've got these two pieces of information, and because I've combined them in my head, I now have this new piece of knowledge. And then from a piece of knowledge, we say, now I've got two pieces of knowledge and I combine those together. Now I have wisdom. Now, yeah, allegedly. Now back to two pieces. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now, about 2 to 3 years ago, Google DeepMind developed an artificial intelligence called AlphaZero that essentially is a few-shot artificial intelligence learning model. And it made up its own knowledge about board games. And then within 4 hours, it went on to be a master of board games, et cetera, et cetera. But when you have these fundamental premises, and there's a point to this, we now have artificial intelligences that are starting to get to the point where they can say, I've got two sets of information. I combine that information together and I have knowledge as an AI. But this isn't human knowledge. This isn't knowledge that has been generated in the same way that we humans generate and produce knowledge. This is knowledge that is increasingly being generated, shall we say, by alien intelligences. So increasingly, I've been saying this for years, we talk in terms of artificial intelligence, but fundamentally, as we build smarter and smarter artificial intelligences that create their own information, their own knowledge, let alone their own wisdom, by putting their knowledge together, we end up with another form, really, of alien intelligence. So now from a human perspective, we talk about human augmentation. I have the way that I as a human produce and generate knowledge and wisdom. However, I have access to artificial intelligence alien tools that now put knowledge together in different ways. So when we talk about expanding human consciousness, for example, we are now augmenting our own intelligence and the way that we construct knowledge and our beliefs around the world and everything else with alien intelligence, which means we have to be moving to a higher plane, because all of a sudden the new knowledge that we're getting access to, if we have a look, for example, at gamer strategy with, again, say Google DeepMind with Dota, as well as Go, the famous Go move, number 32.
Go game, yeah.
But
sorry.
yeah, if we use that, maybe it's a slightly better example.
Yeah.
When AlphaZero won the game of Go all those years ago, the world's best Go player said, the AI made a move that I would never have done, never have expected. And when we go back even further to the era of Deep Blue with Garry Kasparov, there's this concept called the Centaur principle, where you have humans that learn in a particular way and we develop a strategy, for example, in a particular way. You have AIs that learn and develop a strategy in a different way to us. But when you put them together, like this AlphaGo champion, the AlphaGo champion said, because the AI did this move that I would never have done, never have expected, etc., I am now a better player than I was before.
Yeah.
So there is a really interesting kind of psychological space that I don't think many people really sort of dig into, of what happens when human intelligence, etc., meets alien intelligence, and what happens when the two come together. Now, I'm going to throw a piece of sci-fi. I'm going to throw a piece of sci-fi in for you, Chris. Now, we know Neuralink, right?
Yes.
So Neuralink basically is the invasive brain implant. It's an invasive brain chip that Elon Musk's Neuralink, brain machine interface company puts into people's heads.
He thinks that's where it's going.
Yeah, that's it. I think it sort of goes that direction, but I think it goes non-invasive, which is another
I
conversation.
think it goes non-invasive too.
Yeah, because I don't want a chip in my head. Now, the reason I bring this up is when we think about the human brain is plastic. Yeah, it's a neurological term. Now, what I found quite interesting about the latest Neuralink test, I won't call it an experiment, but we'll call it a test, is what they did is they put a brain chip into a quadriplegic patient. And that patient started using the brain chip and suddenly basically start playing a game, so it's like playing a game with his mind. He'd be writing a book. He'd be doing some out of office emailing, all that kind of stuff. So he was starting to do multitasking.
Yes.
But with his brain. Now, psychologists ended up interviewing him about 2 to 3 months later, and you can sort of look at this online. And what the psychologists found was that within his brain, he was starting to do something called cognitive compartmentalization, which is a fancy way of saying that his brain was starting to compartmentalize each task. So when it came to multi-skilling, as opposed to his brain working just in the normal way, his brain was now starting to say, well, I can do 5 things at the same time with my brain. Now can I do 100 things with my brain? So when we talk about traditional human brains, increasingly we're in this world of increasing human consciousness, increasing or improving, shall we say, how we think and how we view the world and how we make the world a better place. But then in addition to that, you bring in brain machine interfaces, and no one really knows the limit of the human brain, when it comes to how many different things could we multitask if we had what Elon Musk calls AI symbiosis, where essentially we are merged with artificial intelligence via brain machine interfaces. So on the one hand, we've kind of got that. And then going to the second part of your question, when I'm having a look at all these different parts of the future, ironically, what gives me the greatest amount of hope is when you have a look at the world today, we have all of these problems. We've got famine, hunger, wildfires, climate change, believe it or not. We've got poisoned air basically around India, all these kinds of different problems. We've got warming seas, et cetera, et cetera. So as a world, basically, we have all of these challenges, geopolitics, cyber, et cetera, et cetera. However, I gave a keynote at COP28 a number of years ago in Dubai. And when you have a look at all the world's challenges, we know them very, very well. We have 600 million children who don't get the education that they need. When it comes to solving these challenges, we have the technology generally to solve world hunger, world poverty, global education, all that kind of stuff. Deploying it all, that's where we often get stuck. That's where lobbyists like coming in and sticking their boot in and so on and so forth. But what gives me the greatest amount of hope is when you really take humanity back to its core. Yes, we have all these challenges. Yes, we have all these problems. However, human ingenuity is staggeringly good at seeing a problem and then thinking through all of the different ways that we could actually solve it and creating the solution to it.
Yes.
And ironically, when we have a look at psychological surveys from about 100 years ago, there have been a couple of surveys that demonstrate, I won't say suggest or show, but demonstrate as humans today, we as individuals are much more capable of managing the complexity of today's world than our great ancestors were. I mean, can you imagine going and having a conversation, for example, with your great-great-granddad and going, so while I'm having a conversation with you, I'm in a virtual reality world while writing a book, having a conversation about X, Y, and Z and, in a movie. And I'd be like, what the are you on about? What?
Yeah, there would be an exorcism at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. So ironically, when we have a look at the human condition and this sort of humanness that you mentioned, that you talk so eloquently about, when we have a look at this humanness, on the one hand, we are fantastically good at seeing a problem and being able to using our cognitive faculties to solve it. But then in addition to that, we are much more capable of getting our heads around complexity than we believe. And this kind of then brings us back to that human frailty. As humans, we far too often doubt ourselves and doubt in our own ability, when realistically, as a species, we should be lifting each one another up and saying, yes, you might think that you're a tiny cog in a gigantic wheel, but what would happen if you as an individual only had access to all the world's knowledge, all the world's skills, and a connected marketplace that would allow you to change the world by the end of the day?
That is brilliant. We could keep going. It's so amazing. Matthew, I just got to say, it's been amazing to have you on the show. I'm sitting there, and Chris, this is like the first time that Chris will attest to this. This is the first time that I've ever allowed a guest to go beyond we're lock, stock, and barrel. This is how
I told you that. I mean, that's why we have these emails, because these are crazy, and I go, well, I'm going to keep up.
There's so much more that I think our audience can learn from you.
I'll have Matthew back.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back. But what's your parting advice to the audience to, stay relevant in this AI world? What is the parting advice? I mean, is it Black Mirror or is it like Star Trek? What do we have to look forward to?
So I suppose basically my parting advice basically would actually sound quite strange. Know your purpose. Figure out what you love.
That.
Now, the reason for that is the Japanese have got a framework that, you guys probably know, basically called Ikigai.
Yeah.
And it's when we have a look at what we as individuals have access to, we can bring anything that we imagine to life increasingly.
Right.
We are increasingly unlimited. While education teaches us how to get a job, not actually change the world, from an individual perspective, what would make you get out of bed every morning? So that's the Japanese Ikigai. That's kind of your mission, your purpose, the thing that you go, this is why I am on this planet. And then you try to align that with the job, the skills that you have, bearing in mind that when we talk about skills, you've got the formal education system and the informal education system. You can learn about new things in new ways, basically very, very fast. In fact, we're using artificial intelligence in the UK to accelerate students' learning 12-fold.
Wow.
Even daughter. So increasingly, you have access to the knowledge, you have access to systems that can teach you new things in new ways faster than you ever imagined. And then the last one is, how do you hook that into something that you can get paid for? Now, you can either go and create a job, or you can either go and work for a company, or you can create your own company. When we talk about the power of artificial intelligence, Sam Altman, about 9 months ago now, and I've been talking about this for the past 10 years, increasingly artificial intelligence will create, launch, and scale its own multi-billion-dollar businesses.
Yes.
However, when we flip it back to the world of AI agents, what happens when you speak to an artificial intelligence agent and say, I've got an idea for a brand new rocket company. Can you help me build and launch it and sell it? And the AI goes, yeah, okay. I've analyzed the entire market. There is a gap in the market for this kind of rocket. Using this artificial intelligence over here, the hyperganic AI, I've designed a new rocket for you, which is 3D printed. I've automatically sorted out the contracts with a manufacturer to produce the rocket. In addition to that, my friend over here my artificial intelligence friend has created a cryptocurrency. They pumped it up like we saw with the goatsy before. Yeah, my AI friend has created a new kind of cryptocurrency. He pumped that up. That's now worth $20 billion. There's your angel investment.
Yeah.
We've now created the product. And by the way, I reckon these are the people you want to sell it to. I've already written the contracts. I've already had a conversation with them about whether or not they would actually like to be the first customers of your new rocket. You're welcome.
And if they don't take it, we'll launch on them.
Yeah.
That's it.
We'll launch on them. So that's going to speed up the customer flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the so what happens when as individuals over the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, that is the kind of power and potential that we are literally this is the crucial piece, have already unlocked.
Yes.
Matthew, thank you. So amazing. So amazing. How do people find you?
Always mind blowing.
I can find my digital clones all over the planet. That's it. They're taking over everything as we speak. That's it. This podcast has merely been a distraction. So you can find me at 311institute.com. You can find me at the Fanatical Futurist and 311 Institute YouTube channels. And you can find me on LinkedIn and any good social network.
Joe, you've got a huge YouTube channel.
I have a couple of what the teenagers call subs now. I think we're at about 750,000 subs. It sounds like anytime I say subs, it sounds like I'm doing an advert for Subway.
Exactly.
I love it. Matthew, thank you again for being on the show. And to our audience, you know what? Stay curious, stay human, stay collaborative. Matthew, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take it easy, everyone. All the best.
All right. Super. Wow.